Hello.
Hi.
Let me just put you on a view and then can you see me?
Yes, I can. I can.
Good.
Yes. Oh my gosh.
Got there in the end.
Yeah,
Uh,
I know. I know. The time was it was a bit
whereabouts
concerning for me, but yeah.
are you?
Oh, sorry, what?
Whereabouts are you?
I'm in Wisconsin, Green Bay, Wisconsin.
Oh
Uh,
right. I
so
don't
like,
know where that is.
yeah, it's like
Is that
Midwestern part. Yeah. Uh,
I thought it might be. So the gap so what's the gap? What's the time where you are at the moment?
well, it's 10 a.m. right now. So
Oh,
yeah.
okay. That is 5 hours. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. It was like really confusing, but I'm glad we managed to find a way to get together at one place. But yeah, and I believe should Dean be joining soon? I think.
Well, I was hoping he was. I sent him the details. I might give him a quick call.
Yeah,
I'll just WhatsApp him and see him, ask him if he's about.
yeah.
Because what it is, he's working and he's got to get back. So
Oh no, that's totally fine. If he is unable to join, that's totally fine. But yeah,
I'll just ask him if he's about, and hopefully he'll get that. And
mhm.
uh, let's see. And also, he's just moved,
Oh
so
yeah. Mhm.
he couldn't find his iPad the other day. So I'm not even sure he's had it yet. But he can. I mean, I can go in on my phone, so he should be able to go in on his phone, maybe.
Mhm.
So, but no, we'll see.
Yeah.
Uh, oh, blimey, hang on. Just knock something over. It's okay.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, first of all, I just want to thank you so much for your time. I absolutely am, this has been a dream of mine for a really long time. And, it's funny because I haven't really been like a Galahad fan for like a really long time. It's only been like probably early last year when I like really started delving into your music. And
Oh, nothing, is
yeah,
it? Blimey.
yeah,
That's
right. Yeah, exactly. And but that was kind of the period where I think it was like 2021 where I really started delving into like neo-prog and like that kind of movement. And of course, your name was constantly a part of the conversation. And I think I it started off with Marillion, which is kind of like the big one, and then kind of went down a bit to Pendragon Arena,
yeah.
IQ, and then
All the
yeah,
usual.
yeah,
Yeah.
right, and then it dwindled down to you guys, and I think I well for Christmas I got this, which
Oh, the biography,
yeah,
Andy's biography. Yeah,
yeah,
cool.
absolutely, and it's fantastic. It's absolutely fantastic. I love the all the anecdotes, all the gig stories, the because it's so hard to find. The thing was, I loved you guys, and I love music. For me is like a fine line. It's like you listen to it, but then you also hear about the history behind it, and you that makes you almost enjoy it more. And I think I was trying to find information about you guys online, and I could really not find much about you guys other than through reviews or like your website. And
Yeah, that's the main resource, really. I
yeah,
think,
right.
other than
Exactly.
the book.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And I was reading through this and it was amazing. But yeah, and I love just as I said, all the little anecdotes. I was laughing out loud during many times of
Yeah.
this.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there was one European tour that we talk about in there at length, and it was
Yeah.
just one disaster after another, basically.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think, well, if I was to really go back to when I first started listening to you guys, I heard about this one album from you guys through like two main sources. One was the Prague Archives, which I regularly go on.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yep,
No,
and
sorry.
unfortunately, I'm. This is kind of a bit off topic, but I'm trying to get registered on there, and they won't activate my email. But it's kind of
Oh,
because I want to write email, I want to write reviews on there, but whatever. And then I think the other source was you probably have heard of them, Sea of Tranquility. They're like
I
a
know difficulty. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's a
yeah,
good site, actually. That is a good
yeah,
site.
absolutely, yeah,
And we've
yeah,
got a couple of guys who do reviews and who always get in touch. So
yeah,
we got anything coming out. So
yeah, yeah,
that's good.
absolutely. And I think it was like Stephen Reed who
Yeah, Steve, he's a good guy, Stephen.
yeah,
Actually,
absolutely. Yeah. And both of these sites recommended to me, or not me specifically, but just the general public, of Empires Never Last, your 2007 album, which is for many people probably your most critically acclaimed album, I guess.
Yeah, it probably is, to be honest. Yeah, yeah. Certainly of all the recent albums, because that album started. That was the first time we'd worked with Carl Groom
Hmm.
from basically for the first time we were working with an engineer producer who actually had empathy with the band and seemed to understand what we were trying to do and what we were looking for. And until that time, I think prog is you can't just work with any old producer with our sort of music. I don't think, because a lot of people don't understand it, and because of course there's lots of other instruments. It's not a basic four piece or whatever. You know, it's getting the balance between keyboards and guitars right, and anything else that we decide to throw in there, which we do occasionally, obviously. And Carl's just great because he's got total empathy, and he'll always say, "Well, how about this or how about that?" And we'll say, "Yeah, that really works," and we just have this connection, you know, which we never really had before with any of the guys that we work with, even though a couple of them were quite used to working in the prog scene, you know. So, including Tony Arnold, who used to work with Robert Fripp and King Crimson back
Yeah,
in the 90s and what have you, a long time ago. But
yeah,
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 but
absolutely. Yeah, and I love Carl Groom's production because it's like I'm not familiar with his work in Threshold, I'm not gonna lie, but I love his crisp, his production is like it's heavy, but it's not like, muddy, or it's not like too, it's very crisp, it's very, but not too polished at the same time. It's just a perfect balance. I think I love that album, and I love what he did in subsequent albums as well. But
yeah,
uh,
no, he is. I think that's the thing. Is we want to get the albums to sound modern. We don't want them to sound like they were recorded in 1973 or something. You know, like
yeah,
Genesis, yes, or Rush or whoever. And he's good at doing that. But also sometimes we'll there'll be a bit of feedback or a note that's a bit odd or some noise, and we'll say, actually, we'll just keep that in there. You know, don't take it out. Just leave it in there. You know, because like you say, if you're not careful, if it's too polished, you end up sort of basically taking out all the soul from the album, you know, which we don't want to do. So,
yeah,
but
absolutely.
yeah, but no,
Yeah.
he's a really good guy to work with, and he's got like no ego either. He's just a down to earth, you know, which is unusual for a guitarist.
Yeah,
But no, he's great. He's great.
yeah,
So,
no, absolutely. And I distinctly remember, because there aren't many times where I hear an album for the first time and I say to especially when it's a prog album, and I'm like, this is a masterpiece the first time I hear it. And Empires Never Last was that one of those few albums where I heard it for the first time and I knew it was something really special. And
all right, yeah,
yeah,
cheers.
yeah, absolutely. And I heard Defiance, and just the gorgeous ethereal vocals that start off that piece, and then you get your voice which comes in, and you're just like, it's so just so with so much grit. You're just like, Defiance, and then just
Yeah, I know.
yeah, and
Yeah.
yeah, I just
Well, I'd probably been listening to too much Cradle of Filth at the time. That's probably what it was. But what the
yeah,
hell?
no, but I was totally blown away. I was absolutely blown away. And then of course the instrumentation is fantastic. The Dean Baker's synths, he's so great at creating an atmosphere, which is kind of such an integral part of not only your music, but I think the music that you guys are grouped into, which is neo-prog. I know you don't really like that title, but yeah,
I
I
think we used to. I think we get called that because when we first started,
yeah,
we were very young. You know, I mean, when we did the first album, three of the band were still teenagers. This is Nothing Is Written back in the late 80s, early 90s. And basically, we were wearing our influences on our sleeves. You know, it did sound a bit like Marillion or a bit like Rush or Genesis because we hadn't really found our own sound and we were quite naive. And so we got lumped in with the whole neo-prog thing. But I think we kind of outgrown that. I mean, we're just Galahad. We've got our own sort of sound. I mean, we don't sound like 12th Night or Pendragon or IQ. At least I don't think we do. Not anymore. And
no,
what I love about Dean's playing is that he's not your standard prog keyboard player. He's not a Tony Banks clone or a Rick Wakeman clone or Martin Orford or whoever.
yeah,
He's his own man, and a lot of his influences are more from the 80s, to be honest. Bands like the sort of new romantic kind of bands like Depeche Mode or Duran Duran or Howard Jones even, you know. And but he sort of got to know a bit more about the whole prog thing kind of after he joined the band, and we'd say, oh, you know, so this is a Yes album, this is a Genesis album, and you know, but all that kind of stuff, you know.
Yeah,
But
that's cool.
but yeah, so he's put his own kind of stamp on the whole thing, which is great.
Yeah, and you know, I think for me, I think when he joined the band, I think you know, you were definitely, I think with Sleepers, you were definitely gaining maturity, I think.
Mm.
But you weren't quite, you hadn't quite honed in that sound, that distinct Galahad sound yet. And I think with Following Ghosts, which is a contender for my favorite album from you guys, is I think when you really started experimenting more and really taking risks. And I think also I just think that was an incredibly creative period for the band, as I read in the book, because I think you wrote years or most of year zero during the recording sessions for Fallen Ghost, I believe, or a lot of that song was written during
Yeah,
that,
yeah, yeah,
which
yeah.
is,
No, we did.
so it's like
Yeah,
almost 2 hours worth of material that was, you know, obviously you took off
yeah.
year zero from Fallen Ghost, but I mean that is just, and I love year zero as well, but yeah, um I just think when he joined the band, he was such an integral part of your sound, of course. And
Oh,
yeah,
yeah, he was, and it made a lot of difference because also, again, he's a really nice guy, and we had an instant connection, and I find it very easy to write with Dean, you know, and we always have done, and also he's very open-minded, you know, he'll never say, oh, we can't do that, or that's not proggy. In fact, he was quite worried about Bug Eye because Bug Eye at the time on Following Ghosts was such an unusual track, and you know, there's break beats on it and stuff like that, and like you know, you can't do that in prog, you know,
yeah,
but I said to him, no, just do it. What does progressive mean exactly? It means trying to push the boundaries and try and do different things. You know, it doesn't mean, to me, it doesn't mean just being a generic prog band, you know.
mhm.
And I think, and we did, and he was worried about it because he hadn't been in the band that long and wasn't sure how our audience would deal with that. And ironically, it was one of the best loved songs on the album, and we did it live quite a few times, you know, because it's
Yeah,
quite different,
I
very
have,
different.
yeah, absolutely. I will go on record and say Bug Eye is my all-time favorite Galahad song. I mean, that song
Oh,
is, you know, every
cool.
time I hear it, I am like transported to another world, and it's just like it's like something out of a movie almost. It's like so. It's and it's about I think it's a metaphor for childbirth, I believe, or
It,
you know,
yeah, it is basically.
yeah.
A friend of mine uh, had a couple of kids, and we were talking about it, and she was talking to me about how it felt and the experience and all this sort of stuff. And I said, "Oh, do you mind if I record you, Anne?" I recorded her. So some of those snippets at the beginning are basically her and her husband, and I just recorded them as samples, and we used them in the track. But yeah, and it just inspired me to write this kind of song, sort of based around the whole idea of creativity. And if you look at the album, on the back you've got a scan, and that is actually her child before the child was born.
Oh
And on
wow.
the front, you've got Knowlton Church, which is near me, which is actually a Norman church, so it's at least what, a couple of thousand years old, surrounded by Neolithic rings, which are even older. And then you've got Hale Bopp above it, the comet, which is obviously tens of thousands of years old. So you've got a front cover and a back cover that, in times of time, are so far apart. And that was the idea of the whole kind of concept of that.
Yeah. And I think that is so cool because if you think about the music on it, I mean, you have like these very tribal beats at times, or like kind of these
Yeah.
like, I don't know, it can sound ancient, but also new, like newer at the same time with the electronic element to it. So I think it very much captures that album very well, I think. But yeah, I think Following Ghost is a favorite of mine. And as it says in the book as well, you know, you have those longer tracks, Bug Eye, Shine, but you also have um, heavy, you know, definitely those heavier elements are coming through with like Myopia or
Yeah.
you know, the poppier-ish tracks like Easier Said Than Done and Perfection Personified and all that stuff. I love just how many how multifaceted that album is, how eclectic it is. And I think Year Zero might even be even a more extreme example of that, where with like jazz elements and baroque elements and all that stuff. And yeah, but it, and it all started from Empires Never Last, as I said, like, which was, that
Yeah.
I worked my
Well,
way back. Yeah.
you started there, went backwards,
Yeah. Yeah.
forward.
Yeah. And it was, yeah. Sorry to,
I was
yeah.
just going to say on something like it's interesting what you say about following Ghosts, because I think we did polarize people to a certain extent on that album. Some of the sort of purists weren't too keen on things like Ocean Blue or Bug Eye or whatever.
Yeah.
And also some people, took umbrage and were sort of saying, they're trying too many different things. They're not consistent. And I'm thinking, well, actually, that's the whole point. We want to try different things. We don't want to, want to sound like AC/DC. Every song is the same. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I love AC/DC and various other bands who are like that, but that's not our remit. That's not what we want to do. And we do like to try different things, whether it be heavy or folk or classical or a bit of jazz or whatever. And it's just more interesting, and we did that on purpose on Following Ghosts. It wasn't something that just sort of happened. We thought we would just try different things. And when we write these days, obviously we've been going so long now, 38 years basically. We just write what comes into our heads and we work on it. We don't think to ourselves, oh, I want this to be an epic, or I want this to be prog, or I want this to be that or that. Do you know what I mean? But because of, I suppose, my influences going back in the day, I mean, I like all sorts of music, but obviously the prog and the rock is the core of that. So I guess there's always going to be that proggy kind of element to anything we do. If I've got to do the writing, that is. I don't know about everyone else, but
yeah, no,
yes,
yeah, absolutely.
That, But actually, I'll just check because I think Dean's just got in touch. So
okay.
Let's just see what he says. He's just pulled up. So oh, cool. Yeah. So you might get a. I don't know how it works.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I'll admit him into the meeting once he joins. But yeah.
Yeah. Cheers. No, that's cool. So that's excellent. Yeah. So I mean, as you probably noticed on the albums, I mean, I think people who really get into the band, they do listen to things a little bit more intensely and realize that there's actually quite a lot of different influences. I quite like a lot of dance music as well. So of course, as you've noticed, there's bits of that in there as well.
Yeah.
And but over the years, I think we've just broadened our horizons basically.
Absolutely. And I think I'm sort of a similar way, because I play guitar and I sing, but I write music. And I think it's very much, there's very much like an emphasis on prog and classical music. But also I like, I'm not afraid, I don't believe in like quote unquote guilty pleasures or anything. I love I unabashedly, is that, yeah, love like modern pop, I enjoy Taylor Swift, or I enjoy Harry Styles or something like that,
Exactly. I mean, like you say, it's not about genres. You either like it or you don't. It's simple.
Yeah.
It's not even whether it's bad or good. It's that's very subjective. If you like it and if it moves you in somewhere and it affects you, and then obviously it's doing the right thing. Hopefully in a positive way, obviously.
Yeah.
But Wichita Lineman by Glenn Campbell is one of my favorite all-time songs, and that's about 2.5 minutes long.
Yeah.
And I think, and they had to do a solo at the end because there weren't enough words when they recorded it.
Oh my God.
And but I just love the atmosphere. It's very almost somber. His voice is almost somber in there, and it's all about the arrangement and the overall effect. And but at the same time, I love Supper's Ready. Genesis, which is 26 minutes long or whatever. But I think people do pick and choose quite a lot. I think these days much more so, and I think like yourselves, I think a lot of younger people, especially in the last sort of few years or so, because of the way music is consumed on the internet, people pick and choose tracks, and not everyone listens to albums. So someone might like a song, for example, a Galahad song, and not even realize it's prog. They'll just go, "Oh, I really like that. It's really
Yeah,
nice." Do you know what I mean?
yeah,
And which is great.
yeah. And it's so funny because like a lot of the music I play. Oh, hello, Dean.
Hello, I got it
Yeah,
at last.
Yes. Yeah. It's funny. We were just talking about like, just how people pick and choose nowadays, just songs from different genres, regardless of whether or not it's prog or not, and like it.
Yeah,
And,
I think I'm sorry, while you're in the middle of your conversation, but
no,
I
no.
was just listening to an
oh,
interview with Sting a couple of months ago now, and he said that we're living in a world where it's all song based rather than album based, and that means you listen to all sorts of music now.
mm,
I
mm,
find it quite, some ways it's quite annoying because you want you want an album, which is a product, which is a whole masterpiece that you put together, but people go and choose track 7 and they don't listen to the rest of it. That's the way it is now, isn't it?
yeah. But I guess also it depends on, obviously, obviously you're very into all sorts of music, but you're quite deeply into it. So I'm assuming you're also an album person as well,
Yeah, absolutely.
which is quite unusual for a younger person actually these
Yeah.
days.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I don't
I
like
know,
shuffle or anything. Yeah.
yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
my nephew, he's all over the place, and he'll like something of one band, and then he'll decide he doesn't like something else of that band, and and I mean, to be honest, I don't really know what he likes and what he doesn't like. It just confuses me.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
I've just got out my vinyl recently, starting to put it all together, and I've realised that I don't think anyone could work out what music I like. It's all sorts.
Yeah.
So I've
Absolutely.
just had a delivery come, so I've just started packing some boxes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've got it.
Mhm.
Very important.
Yes. Oh wow.
Cables. That's what I need.
Uh, no, but I totally agree in the sense that like I'll play a lot of like prog to my family, and my brother who's younger than me doesn't really. I mean, he'll listen to Genesis and maybe some Yes, but he doesn't really. He's not a prog fan by any means, and I'll play like Empires Never Last, and he like my family like collectively is
Mm,
like loves that song because it's like kind of catchy. I mean, it's like it's
yeah.
Brilliant.
I mean it's a very like kind of accessible song if you remove the fact that it's 9 minutes long or anything. But
Oh yeah.
yeah, exactly. And I just that is so cool for me because they don't really connect with other neo I'll try and use that term as little as possible, but neo-prog bands. But I think that that album in particular is just very immediately it
Mm,
hooks them, and I love that because it's like
mm.
yeah, it's awesome. And I've even gotten some of my friends from school into prog.
Good.
My one friend, yeah, my one friend Kyle, if you're watching this, Mikhail, is he's like very into Rush, and he loves Genesis, and
Cool.
we'll constantly be like quoting lyrics like from like the trees or something like that, or whatever. And I just that is like
I used to do that.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah,
But yeah,
sorry.
yeah. Yeah. But I just think that's really cool to like because I think prog is I don't want to say it's a dying art, but I think unfortunately so many of the bands that I know of that still put out music to this day that I like who are like prog bands aren't really they've been around since the 80s or the 90s. And I think I don't know as many younger prog bands other than like maybe metal bands, but prog metal bands. But that's kind of
Mm.
a story. I don't know. But yeah. Now I think I did prepare some questions, some things. Well, first of all, I also wanted to mention in terms of Vampires Never Last, which is the album that got me hooked into the band. The lyrics are incredibly poignant for me because like a lot of music that I listen to. It's sort of cynical. It's kind of not the most,
What?
it's not the most optimistic album, obviously. And I think, you know, I listened to I Could Be God, and oh my God, I mean, that song straight up sounds like something from like a musical. I mean, it sounds, I think that was, maybe that's what you were going for. I don't know, but
I must say that Stuart's always at his best when he's on a rant. It's brilliant. The first album I was involved with was Myopia. He was basically spitting out the words to Myopia, and that was brilliant. And then, of course, by the time we got to Empires, it was all pretty well by that point. I've got an issue with this, and I've got an issue with that, and it was brilliant.
It's about things, you know.
There was a lot going on in the world as well. I mean, it wasn't that long after 9/11 and all that sort of, you know, the stuff that was happening in the world. And it just, I think we managed to get that out at a particular time, didn't we? Where, you know, it did mean that it meant something to people.
Yeah, and things like Sidewinder as well, you know, and and like you say, I Could Be God. I mean, that's quite a dark track, you know, but it's quite cinematic as well. Lots of different parts, and obviously you got the Luther King speech in there as well, which I think fits perfectly. And it's just questions the whole thing, you know, about faith, all that sort of stuff. But yeah.
And I think there was a point when, you know, you're looking at 5 years after 9/11, and the war against terrorism wasn't really going anywhere. And then we've got something like This Life Could Be My Last. And I think what Paul Tippett did with the artwork as well, with it all, I don't know, it's sort of that, to me, just reminds me of that period of time anyway. I think it's one of those, for me, it's one of those releases.
Oh, definitely. I mean, it was I think the artwork ties everything in. That's where Paul, who we still use, Paul Tippett, our graphic guy, again, he's a bit like Carl in some ways from a graphic point of view. He's very empathetic in terms of what he thinks the songs can, you know, conjure up in terms of imagery. And a lot of people think Empires is like a concept album, but it's not actually, not supposedly supposed to be a concept album. But I can see how people will pull things together, you know. And we had one person seemed to think that Empires was basically having a dig at the American Empire. It's actually got nothing to do with that whatsoever. No. It's actually about people who build their own little empires around them. So it's more to do with individuals than nations. But when you read the lyrics, actually, you could come to that conclusion.
I think somebody did say that it was genius calling America she.
Yeah.
And in actual fact, that's aside from the way that it was meant. But I can see that completely, and I think that's brilliant. I love it.
People do, you know, translate things and in their own minds, things mean, you know, it's quite amazing. But
I'm not gonna lie, I did think it was about America for the longest time, because you know, just given, I mean, obviously the war on terror was a little bit before my time, but I think you know, in terms of I Could Be God, you know, there are so many instances in human history where we pin God or use God as an excuse to do horrible things.
Again, I Could Be God is, like you're saying, it's kind of about that. It's about hiding behind these sort of beings, you know, these sentient sort of beings or whatever, and using that as an excuse to do bad. You know, okay, I'll kill someone, but I'll repent next week, so it's fine.
Yeah.
You know, and if you remember, Stu, as well, the middle part with Martin Luther King, we had so many different ideas on what we were going to do there, because you used any dictator from history. You could have done an awful lot with that. And eventually we went for the opposite. We went for someone actually trying to join everybody together again.
Yeah, which is a kind of the positive side. So you go through this song and then this kind of positive side, but then people obviously castigated Martin Luther King, and of course he ended up being assassinated. So so the whole thing is to make people think, you know, which
because we were looking at all sorts of speeches galore. We were looking at all these dictators throughout history, weren't we? And looking at all these different things and where do we go with it, and then to have the complete opposite with Martin Luther King was brilliant. And now I look back on it, really proud of that now.
Yeah, no, it worked really well.
Yeah, and I think especially that like during that Martin Luther King speech part of the song, I think when when it starts to crescendo and it starts to build, there are so many moments where still to this day where I listen to that song and I think there's no way it can get more intense than this. And then it gets more intense. And then it gets more intense. And I'm just like, what? Oh my God. Like that is incredible. That is absolutely, it's just like, it's overwhelming, but in the best way possible. And it's just like, it's the 7/8 riff and it's like, these cool atmospheric synths, which, I was talking about you earlier, Dean Baker, about how, like, you're an integral part of the band, in my opinion. But like, I think when you joined the band, that's really when I feel like the band really reached sort of their, I don't want to say their peak, because I think you guys are still peaking
Yeah,
too.
no, I know what I think. We had a lot of that when I first joined the band. Of course, I joined the band at just the right time to make it feel that way. Technology was starting to really move at that point, and I'm very lucky when I joined the band when I did. We were able to try so many new things which the previous keyboard player wouldn't have been able to have tried in the studio. And we did do an awful lot of experimentation, didn't we, Stu? I remember some of the, I mean, the sort of the what we did with Bug Eye,
Yeah, we
and then what
discussed
we
that.
did with the middle section of Year Zero, and we went through so many sort of, and technology was constantly. We were just trying to make the technology work for what the ideas we had in our head. And by the time we got to work with Carl on Empires, it was working. Carl was able to go, yeah, I can do that. And it all came together at that point, didn't it, really? It was fantastic.
Yeah. No, that's what I was saying. Carl, it was the first time we found someone in a producer engineer role who had complete empathy with what we were trying to do. And I'm not sure we've ever really disagreed with him on anything, have we, really? Nearly everything he said, we've just rolled over or he's actually really right.
Yeah. No, I think he told us a few things when we first started working with him, which really struck a chord. Excuse the pun. And we've stuck by those rules as such, or at least I know I have, in terms of what we learned from Carl Groom and particular things with me with keyboards and sound effects, etc. I'm still using the tools which Carl taught me. And that was, for me, that was quite a defining moment in my musical life, at least, absolutely it was.
Yeah, it's incredible just to hear this conversation and like hear like the process of the recording process and everything like that with all the albums, because I think as I said, I'm a huge fan. It's hard for me not to totally just fawn over this and everything like that, but yeah, I think as I said, I Could Be God is absolutely incredible. I think
actually another thing with I Could Be God was that we went through so many versions of that. I think probably more than any other song I've been involved with Galahad, and the chorus was massively different. And we actually went out and gigged the song, if I remember right, did we? I think we did.
We gigged everything on Empires before we recorded it. It's one of the few times we virtually gigged the whole album before we actually finished the recording. And in fact, we did a live concert in Poland, and which was recorded and put out on DVD, and that was recorded before we'd actually released the actual album, Empires.
Of course, yeah, I forgot about that. It was a year before.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
I've been meaning to get that DVD for so long, but I have to import it from Europe somewhere. But so I haven't watched it yet. I've watched the I Could Be God and I've watched Empires Never Last, so snippets of it. But I think it's fantastic. I mean, from what I've seen so far of it, it
was a really good time. It was such a good time. I think it was so exciting, and especially for me because of the tech was starting to really start to arrive, where I could sync up with Spencer with sequences and arpeggios, and we were really starting to be able to move forward in the technical sense with the music, which we couldn't do before that point as easy. I don't know how bands did it back in the 90s, really, so like we just yes, it was so difficult, but we were able to do all these things. I mean, I was doing an awful lot of stuff seat of my pants, wasn't I? I was having to fly samples in and loops in, and Spencer would only be listening to me, so the drummer would literally have a pair of headphones in just to listen to old me playing, and without hearing the rest of the band, but just so he could sync up with the loops and the sequences. And yeah, it was just at that point when it was starting to really we were able to sort of delve very deeply into that stuff. It was brilliant.
Yeah, that was great fun.
Mm.
And I think, Sidewinder is like overtly kind of political in the sense that, I mean, you have the, what the lyrics are, sorry, false prophets or something like that, something along those lines. And,
Yeah.
And I think, I don't want to get too political. I mean, obviously this
There's
is
a bit of Russian actually as well.
Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah. And I think, but for me, I think obviously this was before my time, but, George W. Bush was like a complete dictator in my opinion. I mean, I think he is, and I think
we had such a laugh, didn't we, with all those, because Carl managed to find loads of quotes.
Yeah.
And we just went for the most stupid quotes, like, I think it was like "men and fish can live in harmony" or whatever it was. It was, I mean, it was hilarious. And I remember there were times when we were staying over at the studio as well, and that whole period, it was just, it was such good fun. And I can remember crying with laughter in the studio on certain times, especially with the George Bush quotes. It was just, it was amazingly funny.
It was. The funny thing is, a lot of people took it far too seriously and took umbrage at some of the stuff that was in there. And it's not supposed to be taken too seriously. Do you know what I mean? It's we were having a bit of a laugh as well, but we were also demonstrating about the fact that he did say some really stupid things. So
yeah, yeah.
Oh. And yeah, that song in particular is a, I think it's the longer songs off the album that probably get the most attention, but even the shorter songs like "Memories from an African Twin" or "Africa Twin."
That one, the one with loads of words, not.
Yeah, right.
Oh yes, do yeah, la la la. I hope people get our humor. I think people do get our humor, but you couldn't do it if you didn't laugh about the stuff. So as well, it's so important.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I love, like, I think that kind of song kind of, you hear a little bit of like the jazzier influences in like Year Zero and stuff like that, and I love that song. And as I mentioned, Empires Never Last. My family loves that song. It's very hooky. It kind of has like a lounge jazz quality in the verses, and I love the, those like quick.
That's the whole point, is that there is such a lot of diversity. You've got the verses that are almost kind of laid back in a kind of jazzy way. Then you've got this really heavy, the verses, and then you've got the really heavy choruses. Yeah. And then you've got the last but one chorus where I even come off it, and I was doing my best Ronnie James Dio impersonation.
Yeah.
And it's like, and it's so different to the rest of it. So, but no, and I love the fact that we do all that kind of stuff in a lot of our music. And like on the new album, the end of the last song on the album, on The Last Great Adventurer, the actual track, it sort of finishes in a very kind of jazz style, basically. But as if you're in a jazz sort of venue or something,
Mm-hmm.
And so we just like to throw things in, and obviously once you've heard it, it's coming. But when you hear it the first time, people go, "Oh, blimey, I wasn't expecting that," or whatever.
Yeah. And I have to say, like, in terms of like your recent album, The Last Great Adventurer, for me, that is one of the, I'm not just saying this, I truly mean this. I think it's one of the best albums you put out in a long time. I think, as you mentioned, the title track is so endearing and so passionate and so just honest, and so it's about your father, of course, Stu, and I think the lyrics are just, I think it's really nice, and you have some cool Lee Abraham guitar stuff and soloing, and just it has that heavier element, but I just think the chorus sounds glorious, and it's just incredible. And actually my favorite song after that album might actually be the bonus track. I think it's what is it, Another Life Not Lived. which he wrote with
Yeah.
what was it? Wrote with Neil Pepper, I think, right? Before he
Yeah.
passed away. Yeah. And it's just there's like a haunting quality about that song that just emanates it.
And the great thing is Lee really kept the essence of what Neil played. So when we re-recorded it, we still feel like it's Neil playing on it.
Yeah,
which is
yeah,
great.
that was my biggest concern, because we did a demo of that. In fact, on our website there is a demo with Neil playing on the demo, because he played pretty much all the instruments on the original demo, including guitar, bass, etc. And we needed to make sure that we captured that kind of atmosphere on the final version that Lee played on, and he did it brilliantly. And it's ironic that we wrote that song, well, what, 12, 13 years ago now, obviously before we lost Neil. And he was actually ill at the time we wrote it. He actually had cancer at the time, but it was about someone else who was a teenager, who was one of my friends' relatives, her nephew, I think, and he was only 16. So, and that's why it's called Another Life Not Lived, because he never got to really live his life. So yeah, quite poignant, as it were.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think every song off that album is incredible. I mean, obviously, I mentioned my two favorites off that album, but I love Alive is just so adrenaline pumping, and then again, it has that kind of more softer kind of bridge, which is just brilliant. I think the way it's so like, melodramatic in the middle, and then you get the heavier moments throughout.
Yeah.
And Omega Lights is, and again, a more atmospheric piece, and I love it. And Blood, Skin and Bones is like, I love the use of the I'm not sure who you used to sing on that track, the kind of cries.
Dean can explain that.
Yeah. I did that with Anastasia Coburg. So yeah, that was good fun.
Yeah.
And then yeah, we mucked around with that quite a lot. But the original riff came from it's the first time we've ever done this with the band, where it wasn't most of the music comes from, most of the ideas come from myself and Stu. We tend to work together, don't we, on most of the things. But this one we had Coburg. She did played that original riff and came up with that original opening, and then we just added it to sort of like, Galafied it, I suppose you could say. So that was good fun. That was great. But that whole album, I think, took us by surprise a bit, didn't it, really? I think we weren't 100% sure how it was going to be received.
Yeah, no, definitely. We were, well, I was quite slightly worried about it, because it was the first album in a while. It was quite different to the previous album, Seas of Change, because it was separate songs and whatever, not a concept as such. And we recorded it during COVID, during lockdown, and the only instruments we recorded at Thin Ice Studios, which is where Carl worked, were the drums. Luckily, we recorded the drums before the whole COVID thing kicked in. Otherwise, it would have been quite difficult to keep it going. And then during the whole COVID thing, we recorded all our various bits and bobs at all our homes. And so we didn't record it in a commercial studio. And then we just sent everything to Carl. And that's where his genius came in. He managed to sort of knit it all together and edit it. And it's ended up sounding, I mean, when we first heard it, we couldn't believe it. And people were saying it's probably one of the best produced albums that we've ever done. And it is. I can't believe what he did with my vocals, because I just sent him loads of stuff. Because basically, I did it at home. I had I like when I record to have someone to record with, to say to me, well, that works, or that doesn't work, or maybe try this or that. And of course, I had none of that. I had to do it all at home. We weren't allowed to meet up at the time, and so I just did lots of different takes and just sent them all over. And he just managed to put it all together. And of course, we all did the same kind of thing, really,
Yeah.
But it all worked really well. And I'm quite humbled, really, that the reaction, the critical reaction that we've had for the album has been so good. Probably the best we've had in possibly since Empires, actually. So
Yeah, what
you
a
know,
shock. I was worried as well. I wasn't think I was wondering whether people might think it's too commercial sounding, or would it really fit within the Galahad sound, and but yeah, I'm very pleasantly surprised how well it's been received.
No, I adore the new album. I think it's incredible, and I heard that you guys. I heard from an interview and also in our email that you're recording a new album called The Long Goodbye, which is about like dementia. I
yeah,
think. Yeah. How is
yeah,
that? How's the process of that going?
it's all done. It's all finished.
Oh my gosh.
It's been mastered. Everything. Well, all that basically both of those two albums consisted mainly of songs that me and Dean had been working on for donkey's years. In fact, most of those songs were written and recorded long before Seas of Change. But because Seas of Change was such a sort of zeitgeisty album, it was all happening at that point about the whole Brexit thing, etc. We thought we've got to get this out now. So we put everything else on hold and made sure we recorded that album, finished it, and released it quite quickly, actually. In fact, Dean, if you think about it, that's probably the quickest album we've done, isn't it? We literally wrote that whole song,
Yeah.
just gradually got. It
Seas of
wasn't
Change.
2 minutes. We just kept adding on to it, and me and Dean were bouncing ideas off each other, sending things back.
It is so funny though, because we had this song, which was this piece of music which was about 7 minutes long, and Stu came up with some ideas, and we were like, oh yeah, I know what I want to do this about, and we started working on it. And then I'd get a phone call from Stu saying, oh, can you elongate that section, because I've got a vocal I need to fit in there, so do something different. And then maybe when you finish that, we haven't put a harpsichord on yet, do you want to pop a harpsichord on? And then, oh, what about Mellotron? Don't forget Mellotron, we need to get Mellotron on there. And it carried on until eventually it was like 25 minutes long. And then we thought, oh, the hell with it, we'll make it into an album now, make it 40 minutes long. So
I kept writing 4 words as well. So I thought, oh, right, blimey, I'm thinking, and at one point I was worried that we couldn't write enough music, and I just was going to ditch some lyrics. And actually, no, why not? Because it was cohesive. It was telling a kind of story in a way. So we just kept going, and we ended up with this sort of 42-minute piece of music that that was completely, different from what we were expecting it to be in the first place. But that's the beauty of writing. You don't quite know where it's going to take you. Like I said to you earlier, we don't really plan to write things in a certain way. It just sort of morphs, doesn't it? It just sort of happens and gradually organically sort of turns into this or that or whatever. You never quite know where you're going to end up.
Oh, it's great. I mean, when Stu would phone me up and say, oh, I was thinking of and he'd sort of mention a particular thing, and I'd go, who's that? And I'd have to look it up and listen to it on YouTube. And then when we got to the bit where my demo of the music stopped, I'd then make sure all the metronome was turned off, there's no click track or anything, and I'd literally start just humming things in my head, and then I'd have to work out what the time signature was and where we were going with it, what the tempo was, and then have to fit it to our template. And that was great fun. Really good. We were just both getting as excited with each other and phoning each other all the bloody time, weren't we? I've got another idea.
Okay, let's stick that in there.
Yeah.
It wasn't a thing job, to be perfectly honest, but no, it was
Great
really
fun.
good. Yeah.
And of course, we didn't have a bass player. We didn't have a guitarist at the time. So I was having to sort of write guitar type of things with keyboard and samples, etc. And then just hope that a guitarist could, at some point we'd work on it. When Lee joined, Lee was saying, yeah, there are certain things where it was not fluid for a guitarist to play something on the, it was like, and he was like, bloody keyboard players.
Exactly.
But I think that makes it interesting.
Yeah, exactly.
Because it's not, a guitarist wouldn't have played some of those riffs because they wouldn't have been natural.
Exactly.
They wouldn't be a natural shape to play.
Exactly. It makes it more unorthodox, doesn't it?
Yeah. So Lee had to really work on playing a lot of those guitar riffs, and all credit to him because he did it. He actually did a fantastic job on something which was, I never realized was actually really difficult for a guitarist to play.
Mm,
It was good. It was very good.
No, it worked really well. And again, critically, that one went down well, you know. So, of course, the die-hard prog audience loved it because it was just basically one piece of music, 42 minutes. But we did a couple of extra tracks, some edits as well, as you probably know. Just, you know, so we might get a little bit of radio play, which helped.
Yeah, I think it's funny because I mentioned to my one you know, in my one class at school, like my teacher was like, "Oh, what are you guys doing over spring break?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, I'm interviewing this band. They're from the '80s. They're like a cool neo-prog band." And people were looking up Galahad on their phones, and they were like, "They have a 42-minute long song." Like they were all freaking out. Like, and it was like,
Yeah.
yeah, it's super funny. Yeah, but yeah, and yeah, I love Seas of Change. I think then again, it kind of is like it feels like that album almost kind of reminds me of like what you guys were writing in the 90s a little bit, like Sleepers kind of era. It has a bit of that vibe with while still feeling it's pushing boundaries. And I think and
Oh,
I
it is. Out of all the albums we've written since Empires, it's probably the most more traditional, or I say traditional, it contains more traditional elements than maybe some of the other albums contain. Um, but again, that wasn't the plan initially. It just sort of happened like that. But yeah, it's got more of a traditional vibe. Whereas I think, for example, the new album sounds a lot more modern, I think, personally.
yeah,
But
I would agree. Yeah.
it's interesting to see what other people think outside the band, you know, for example, what you think, for example, you know. So.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think you know, you know, then again, I think considering that it's 42 minutes, I mean, there's not many songs that I know of that are more than you know, 25 minutes. But you know, I think it flows incredibly well. I mean, it's a very cohesive album in my opinion. It ebbs and flows and it moves from section to section. And then again, it has that you know, it has some like recurring themes. And I especially love the ending of my favorite part of the whole song is the ending. Not the very end, but the faces, faces, all I see everywhere is faces kind of section. Because that almost reminds me of like what you guys were it kind of harken. I mean, it sounds modern, but at the same time, it sounds like what band like like what you guys were doing in the sort of '80s almost. I mean, it just has like that vibe to it. I don't know, but I just love that the whole song is great. And it has some heavy moments, of course. I love that little break towards like maybe three quarters in, where it's like you have that Dean Baker, like Jean-Michel Jarre kind of section, and it's like
Yeah.
yeah, that's really cool. I really like that.
Love all of that. If I can fit something like that in, I always will.
Yeah.
Try.
Yeah.
And it's normally when Spencer on the drums is going, "Oh, I'll go and have a cup of coffee now," then while I go off and do something, you know.
Yeah. And yeah, I just sorry, I'm looking at the questions again. Yeah, I think and even the album that preceded that, which isn't really like Quiet Storms, which is sort of like your more acoustic album. That is I really enjoy that. And then again, it has some songs that I haven't been able to hear because I haven't unfortunately I can't access. Maybe it's on your website, I don't know, but Not All There, your 1994 like that a Galahad Electric Company album, which was sort of acoustic, and there's some songs on there that are featured on Quiet Storms, and I love the more kind of naked, if you will, or raw kind of sounding songs, and it just the arrangements are very nice, and yeah, I really enjoyed that album, and
Again, we
oh, sorry, yeah.
had sort of disappeared really. We never really got to the bottom of it, to be honest. But we wanted to do something. You know, we had all this stuff that we wanted to do, and we would. And Dean, you sent Roy a ton of ideas, and I don't think he responded, did he? He didn't even get back to us.
So we were a little bit of in limbo, weren't we?
Yeah,
At that particular point. So I'm just going to need to get my power supply for my MacBook. I'm gonna...
But basically, So we thought, and I've always wanted to do a more pastoral kind of album, and we had quite a few tracks that we hadn't used that were a bit more pastoral, and some of the older songs I've always liked, but I felt we could do better arrangements of, including some songs from the Galahad Acoustic Quintet that was released, recorded back in 1994, and then we sort of come up with this whole idea of doing these other versions, and there's a few versions of songs on Empires, like This Life, for example. And we just thought it'd be something a bit different to do. Again, also just to keep our name out there whilst we were trying to decide what to do in terms of the band lineup. And Carl Groom very kindly said he would help play guitars, and he did some acoustic guitar work on the album as well. Because there's no electric guitars to speak of on that album, which was one of the ideas, you know, just to keep it quite mellow, almost kind of folky in some ways. And so that was, again, it was just to show a different side of the band. And then of course the next album was completely different.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think I was thinking about this because you know, everybody in Galahad plays on that Quiet Storms album, even though it kind of sounds more like a Galahad Electric Company album. But when you're writing a song, and by the way, I very recently I was listening to the album, what is it, When the Battle Is Over, which is,
oh yeah, that's Galahad Electric Company. Yeah, we did that in town. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, I mean, that isn't particularly, I mean, yeah, it has proggy elements, but it's not like your standard prog. I mean, it's kind of just straight up pop synth music.
Yeah.
You know? I really, yeah.
That's why it's called Galahad Electric Company, because to separate it from the main Galahad, basically. Because obviously me and Dean, although we write pretty much everything generally for Galahad or GEC, we felt these songs were more, they were a bit different, and we felt they fitted the whole Galahad Electric Company ethos, I suppose. And Galahad Electric GEC is actually just me and Dean. There's no one else involved. And it was also a showcase for Dean's kind of electronic leaning.
Sort of anything goes, isn't it? It's an anything. Yeah. I mean, we've got a bit of an ethos for anything goes with Galahad, but we take that even further with the electronic one. It's great fun. Yeah. And I mean, things like muck around with Stuart's voice and all that. It's great fun. Absolutely great fun doing that.
Yeah, I can see something in place, and I don't recognise it.
Yeah, yeah. I like to chop up Stuart's vocals and really, like, you know, muck around with them, and maybe you know, chop away at words and move the timing of them and do all sorts of things. It's great fun. And of course we can't really do that with a rock band. You can't really do that. You've got to have a particular format, but the electronic stuff is great fun for doing that. Absolutely love that.
It's just nice to have a slightly different outlet, you know. And we did a similar sort of thing with Soul Therapy. I mean, there's a couple of songs on there that would never appear on a Galahad album, and I'm sure a couple of the other guys in Galahad would probably decide that it was just as well.
Yeah. I think, yeah, because Soul Therapy is about isn't it about your mother, I think, or
yeah, the last half of the album, the last 6 songs are all about my mother. Yeah, because she passed away a couple of years ago, right in the middle of the whole COVID thing. And it was quite a difficult thing to process and go through. And to be honest, writing all those ideas and songs was actually good catharsis. And it was good to work with Dean to try and work through all that and put them all to music and, you know, put them out on the album. And there's a song at the end called Belly Full of Stones, which is quite simple, but I love it. It kind of just demonstrates pretty much exactly how I was feeling at the time. Very raw, very stripped away, quite a different vocal, and no, I'm very, you know, very.
Well, that song, that Belly Full of Stones, you sent me a vocal, and I put the music to the vocal. It was great fun to do that.
Oh, those, yeah. So I literally recorded it here on Pro Tools without anything. Did I attempt to do it to a click or not? I can't remember.
You did, yeah. You had a tempo for me. And we worked on that, and to then go, here's a vocal, put some music to it. And of course, you get all these ideas, and eventually we actually kept it quite simple and quite basic with a lot of the piano, and the it's a sampled piano, and I made sure that all the foot pedal stuff was turned up to full volume, all the noise, all the resonance within the piano was all turned right up, and it just gives it that real sort of earthy feel.
Oh, it's very raw, very raw.
Yeah, love it.
But no, the atmosphere was perfect actually for that track.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of, I thought of a question as you were talking about that, because like when you sent that like recording of your voice to a click, when you're writing, and this is more of like a compositional question, but because I think of music in terms of like three main facets: melody, harmony, and rhythm. And which where do you, which one do you tackle in terms of like trying to get an idea across? Like, do you write like chords first, or do you write a melody first, or do you write like a rhythm first? I mean, I know that's kind of a difficult question probably to answer because it's probably all three, but you know.
Yeah, I mean, all three have.
Yeah, I was going to say.
But as I'm a vocalist, basically the melody to me is the most important thing. Sometimes I'll come up with a really strong chorus and write around it. Other times I'll just write. I write verses and then try and come up with a chorus. Other times Dean will send me a piece of music and that will just inspire me completely, and I will just write it. And obviously you write yourself, don't you? But you probably understand this. But sometimes you can write a song in 10 minutes. Sometimes it will take you a couple of years.
Yeah,
totally. Like Be God, for example, on Empires, as deep as we said before, we had so many different versions, and the things about it that just didn't really quite gel musically and lyrically, and the timings. But eventually we actually got it to click, and one day we thought, yeah, that's it. It works. It's fantastic.
We massively simplified the end of the chorus, didn't we?
Mm.
And it was the da 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 dum da 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 dum I da 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 dum da 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 dum could be, and once we put that in there, that seemed to just glue everything together. And yet, as Stuart was saying, when we did like for instance This Life, I remember writing that one with Roy's around at Roy's, and honestly it was 5 minutes, it was done. So quick, wasn't it? It's crazy. And then doing, adding all the fairy dust and the production side of it might have taken longer, but the basic raw song was a few minutes and it was done.
Yeah.
Crazy. Yeah.
It's funny how it all goes, actually, isn't it?
Yeah, I love all that. But I think, like, to answer your question as well, as I think obviously Stuart's very much melody, always melody. And I like a vibe. So to get a vibe, sometimes it might be coming up with a chord structure, but it's a rhythmic feel to whatever's going on. And I love it's on the upcoming album. We've got a song which is like Shadow in the Corner. And that for me is just like, that's as funk as we dare go. It's got a real vibe to it. It got a real groove to it. And I love anything like that. It's all, for me, it is a lot about rhythm.
Oh, without a doubt, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting to hear, because I think and the thing about This Life Could Be My Last, how that was written in 5 minutes. I mean, that's so funny because it's like literally one of my all-time favorite songs, and the fact that it was just so
a lot of people.
Exactly.
A lot of people seem to catch on to that, and they have done over the years. Again, it's a very personal lyric, and I think one reason why the Last Great Adventure has done quite well is because it is quite a personal album. The lyrics are quite personal. I think people can equate with those, and I think with This Life, people did. People sort of equated with that whole song, and I think that you can tell a good song because when we do, sometimes me and Dean do stripped down versions. We'll do the odd gig where it's just me and him on piano or keyboards. And I think that's how you can tell a good song. If you can strip it right down and you still got those elements and you still got a song in there somewhere. Whereas I think sometimes, and I shouldn't say this, but I think yes, we're quite guilty of this. Everything is so rambling and you think, blimey, is there actually a song in there somewhere? And I think we're quite mindful of that. But I think and also maybe we've made her off her own back in the past. We're not one of these bands who has to, you know, put in lots of different clever time signatures. You know, we're not Dream Theater or King Crimson or whatever. But I think part of that's maybe because of me, because I tend to drive a lot of it, or have done, or me and Dean between us, and Dean's the same, I think, as well. So yeah, we're not a big a technical prog band or metal band or whatever, but I think that's a good thing. I think the heart and soul of a song is more important to me than making it as clever as possible. And sometimes you can integrate the two, but that's quite a hard thing to do. And a lot of music that is done like that, it kind of leaves me cold a bit. And I think people sometimes they do see us more the commercial end of prog or melodic end or whatever. And yeah, I would go with that. I think that's right, because we want to write good songs, hopefully with good melodies, but also songs that sort of, you know, can get you here if necessary. You know, get get inside your soul and inside, well, your head and your soul. You know. And I just like, you know, I like to think we write for the head and and the soul as well, you know. Sorry, I'm being a bit rambly there, but you know, just...
Oh no, not at all. Yeah, I think when I'm writing, you know, I think I do have a tendency, I'm not gonna lie, to fall into that trap that you were just talking about, where it's like I want to make it more complicated than it needs to be. And I think you know, it sometimes, I mean, the best music I know of is, you know, or not the best music, but my favorite music is more stripped down, kind of simple music. Not really. I mean, yeah, you have some longer epics, but
I think it's all about the arrangements. It's all about the arrangements and what, you know. I know it's a cliche, but it's as important what you leave out as what you put in. You know, you need space.
I like to use the verses to get the groove, and then you rock out on the chorus, don't you? So choruses tend to be the one thing that people have got to hook onto. So in actual fact, the last thing you want to do is make the chorus too complex.
Yeah.
But you can do what you want on the verses if you really want to go for it. Do it on the verses.
And then you can do all the weird shit in the middle eight or whatever.
Yeah, that's right. That's the great thing of again, being a keyboard player and being able to find a band like Galahad was brilliant for me, because it was like, I'll go off and do something for 3 or 4 minutes. Oh, okay. Could never do that in a pop band.
So, but yeah, I mean, yeah, it's funny. But it's like I said earlier, when we're writing, it's strange, because obviously we have this whole neo-prog thing, but we genuinely these days we just write for ourselves, you know, and hopefully people will come along with that as well. And I don't know, maybe because we've been going so long, it's sort of ingrained in a certain way, I suppose. So we never quite know how things are gonna turn out, and we don't find it particularly hard to come up with ideas and songs, whereas sometimes in the early days we did. But again, maybe that's due to the fact that we've been doing it so long. So, you know, we kind of know what we've got to do to come up with the ideas or whatever.
And of course, we've got probably about 60 in the bank somewhere as well, haven't we? On our server, we've got about 60 song ideas still to work on if we want to revisit them.
It's scary, because I've got to write about a whole load of different things. I'm running out of things.
Yeah, I think I've been meaning, I wanted to say this during this sort of conversation, but I think you know, well, Dean Baker, I think you know, we were talking about this earlier, but like your keyboard playing is not like Tony Banks or Rick Wakeman or you know, Keith Emerson, and that's kind of what makes it special for me, is like your playing. And you, in this book, you say you're more of a synth player than a keyboard player, I think, in the book. Yeah. And you know, I just think that adds such a distinctive element to the sound. And Stu, I think for me, you're like one of the unsung singers, if you will, of prog. You know, I just think like you know, I just think you know, it's really, and I know you auditioned for Marillion when they were looking for a singer, and Genesis when they were looking for a new singer after Phil Collins. And was it, I've always thought this, was it like awkward to come back into the band? Was it awkward between your bandmates, you know?
No, not at all. No, I mean, the whole Marillion thing was a bit of a ruse, really, because at the end of the day, my idea, which then I was told all that could never happen, would be to keep Galahad going but do the Marillion thing, but still have the Galahad thing. And people are saying, oh, you can't do two bands at the same time. But people do that all the time these days. Look at Mike Portnoy, for example, the Dream
Yeah.
Theatre guy. They're always doing different things. You know, you can do other things. It depends on whether you've got the commitment or you've got the passion or whatever. And also, and again, I went for it because I knew it would be good publicity for us, and it was, because we weren't a particularly well-known band back in those days. We hadn't even recorded an album back in '88. We were still working on our first sort of cassette, as it were. So it was fantastic publicity, and it ended up in us getting our first gig in London, which was brilliant and very exciting for a bunch of youngsters. I was only 24 at the time, which, you know, pretty young. And I spent a day in the studio with this prog band, who were the biggest British prog band, probably, well, certainly of the new wave, probably in the world at the time. Certainly the UK, you know. They just had a massive album. And no, it was good fun. It was great fun. But yeah, to be honest, it was more to try and drum up a little bit of publicity, which it did. Genesis is a different thing. I just thought I'd try it, and they just rejected me out of hand, and they even got my name wrong when they sent back the letter.
That is terrible.
My name was Stuart Nicholson, so, you know, okay. Maybe they confused me with Pete Nichols. I don't know. It's just for my cue.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine, like, what if there was like an alternate universe where maybe you were in Marillion or were in Genesis? I mean, that would have been, who knows what that would have been like. I mean, that would have been pretty.
Yeah, it would have saved me 30 years of working as an accountant, so I'd be quite chuffed about
Yeah.
Yeah.
But no. I mean, you know, it was pie in the sky, but it was one of those, when you're younger, you know, you do those sort of things, and you know, and I enjoyed it, and I think obviously Steve Hogarth got the job, but I don't think he auditioned after I did. But in Mark Kelly's book recently, he was talking about people who went for it, because I think Alan Reed went for it as well from Palace.
Right here, yeah.
That one, yeah.
Yeah.
And I've spoken to Mark about it after a few years, and he basically said, he thought I sounded a bit too much like Fish, and I thought, well, hang on a minute, you've asked me to learn Fish's songs, you've never had another singer, I'm only 24.
Yeah.
What do you expect me to do? Sing in a completely different style? Well, the other thing was they didn't actually tell me what they really wanted. It was a case of turn up, sing the songs, and they'll see if they like what they hear. That was it. Which was fine. That was because they were probably in an unusual situation as well, because it was the first time they'd had to do the same thing, I guess. So yeah, it was a bit bizarre, but it didn't matter. I mean, they were all very good. They were all very good to me, very friendly. And Pete, the bass player, the audition was in London, which is about 100 odd miles from here. At the end of the audition, he said, "Oh, hi Stu. Yeah, would you like a lift home?" And I said, "Well, if you want to drive me to Dorset, yeah, that's fine." "Oh, you don't live in London?" "No, I live on the south coast." "Oh, I can't really give you a lift home then." "That's fine." I drove. But it was good fun. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's definitely, I mean, yeah, it's interesting because I've always heard like the process of like, or, you know, like how Steve Hogarth got into the band, or like how was it Ray Wilson got into Genesis, but they never talk about like all the other people who didn't get into the band, you know, and like you know, those people, and it's I was really shocked to see that. Oh, well, you know, it was pretty cool to see that you know, took the risk of auditioning, and you know, yeah, I mean, it's pretty awesome.
It was quite funny because in those days, again, it was before we recorded anything. It was before digital technology had really kicked in. So in order to try and get the audition, I actually used my stereo at home, and I recorded a Marillion track on one half of in one speaker and my vocal in the other, which must have sounded really odd to them, to be quite honest. And to my amazement, they actually got in touch and asked me to go for an audition. But the funny thing was, I didn't know about it for a couple of days because I was still living at home with my mum at the time, mum and dad, and they said to me, "Oh, Stu, I left a note by the phone. Someone from Marillion or something like Marillion, they called about doing a gig or something. I said, Mum, that's Marillion. She said, they left a message. They asked you if you could call them back. I said, that was 2 days ago. Why? How do I stop? Oh, she said, I just thought it was something local. I said, no, they're one of the biggest bands in the country, and you've just given me this message. And it was hilarious. So then she had to sort of scrabble around and try and find the blooming message that was by the phone that had suddenly disappeared. So it's like, oh, okay. And I called them thinking, oh, it's too late now, because obviously that was a few days ago. But no, they were very good. And yeah, they invited me along to London. And
just thought you were playing it cool.
That's what it was.
Yeah.
Yeah. I didn't think about it.
Oh dear.
It was very funny. Yes.
And I think you, in the book, I think you said you sang Afterglow by Genesis as like the audition song, or was that?
That was the audition song for Galahad.
Oh, for Galahad.
Yeah.
Okay.
That was the song I ever sang when I auditioned with Galahad.
Okay, so I totally got that wrong. Yeah. No, that's, yeah, it's funny because I'm actually I think I'm doing that song for my audition for UW Green Bay, which is a university right locally.
Oh,
so
yeah, cool.
yeah, so it's kind of funny, kind of sort of a connection there. But yeah,
that's quite. It's like 4 decades later.
Yeah. No, yeah.
How bizarre.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And I also have to ask, because I know I read it, I saw it in an interview, that I just wanted to ask this, like, how is Spencer's health as of recently, in terms of like, because I know he had like a brain tumor, I think, that came back. How's that doing in terms of his health?
I think he's a lot better. Unfortunately, he had a recurrence of a brain tumor that he first had when we were recording Empires all those years ago. And in fact, if you watch that video in Poland, we actually did that gig when he had the tumor in his head.
Oh my God.
And when we got, wasn't that right, Dean? When we got back,
yeah.
he then
a week later, it was about 10 days later, he then had the op.
Yeah, to take out the tumor. And they managed to take out pretty much all of it, but it affected his motor senses, and he had to pretty much learn to re-drum or drum again. That was obviously about a long time ago, 2006. Was it? Yeah. So after that, he was obviously on medication and what have you, and had various checkups. And up until 2 years ago, he was pretty good. And then they discovered that the tumor had started growing again. So basically, he had to go and have chemo, or rather, they took as much out as they could, but they didn't take quite as much out because it really would have affected his motor sensors this time, which wouldn't have been a good thing, obviously. And he had to go for chemo, so he did. I think he went on a round of six rounds of chemo, and it didn't make any difference. So they had to kind of rethink, and they sort of rejigged his medication and what have you, or whatever made up the chemo. And then he had a second round of chemo toward last year, which at the moment appears to be okay. I mean, he's had a couple of scans, I think, and there's no sign of any growth at the moment, which is great.
Yeah, that's good.
And we did record a few weeks ago, rehearse a few weeks ago, and it seemed to go quite well. You know, it seemed to be okay. Spence is still, obviously, he struggles a bit psychologically, I think, but we said to him, no, you sound great, and people who are watching you aren't going to really know that there's a real problem. In which there frankly isn't really. You know, he can still do that. It's just it's confidence, I think, a lot of it. And that's one reason why we haven't played any live shows since COVID. I mean, there's COVID itself, and then we had some shows lined up, which unfortunately we had to knock on the head. And hopefully we will be playing towards the end of this year. We've got a couple of shows hopefully lined up. So yeah, so fingers crossed he's going to be all right.
Yeah, I really do hope that he gets better and everything like that, because I think obviously he seems like a wonderful guy. I wish I could have spoken to him, obviously, but he's an incredible drummer. I read the little anecdotes of his like early days in the band, like in the 80s, and like how he would haul his drum set to like the gigs all by himself, and sometimes
he hauled it to his audition basically. Yeah. And he was only either 15 or 16. And the first gig we did with him was at a theatre in Bournemouth. It was about 1,000-seater theatre, I think. A big old, lovely sort of Victorian kind of theatre and what have you. And basically we had to get permission for him to play because he was underage because they had a bar license. Luckily, they let him play. But we've known him since he was around 14, I think, because we used to rehearse at a youth club locally in Christchurch, near where we live, and Spence used to watch the band, and he was he was only a kid really, but he was so interested in the music and what we were playing, which for someone that age was quite unusual. Most of the kids weren't bothered at all, but no, he was really into it, and then we auditioned 6 drummers a couple of years later, and Spence was easily the best, and he's got a lot of natural talent. And a lot of ideas, and
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 very technical drummer. And he's very technical as well. He's really into the technical aspect of drumming, which is brilliant.
Yeah, because I play around with drums a little bit, not really a lot, but I couldn't imagine just the sheer responsibility of like keeping that rhythmic foundation going for an entire band. I mean, that just seems like a lot, but he does it incredibly well. I mean, he is truly an amazing drummer. I
think he's very underrated within prog circles. I mean, the thing about Spence is he's great fun. If you meet him personally, he's the life and soul of the party. He's hilarious, to be honest. But when you pull away slightly, he doesn't court any publicity or anything like that. He never has done. He's quite quiet and sort of in the background almost, and happy for other people to front things and what have you. And I think maybe partly because of that, he people haven't really mentioned Spence a lot in dispatches in the world of prog, but I think he is a really good drummer. I think he's one of the best drummers that I've ever come across, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah.
And also he'll do things you won't expect as well. It's different stuff. So, yeah. So hopefully, long may it continue. So.
Yeah. Sorry. I was so. Yeah, I think I explained how Empires Never Last was the first album. I worked my way backwards, forwards, and obviously the first 4 albums are quite different from that album, but also you see where you're going, or first 5 albums actually, I think obviously I have to say, as of recently, I think Nothing Is Written. I think I used to not really totally understand that album. I thought it was kind of a little bit derivative, but now I love it.
Well, it is derivative because it's like I said to you before. It's I mean, we didn't really think about whether it was derivative or not at the time. We just wrote what we wrote. But it kind of was, because when you're that young, you soak up all these different influences, and yeah, I do smile when I listen to some of those songs. I listen to Richelieu, I think, yeah, there's a bit of Marillion in there, maybe a bit more than a bit of Marillion.
Yeah.
And then on some of the other, there's a song. Oh, I forgot. What's the name of it? See, I can't remember my own songs now, or our own songs. That does sound very like Rush, I can't think of the name of it. What is it? Doesn't matter.
It's one of the heavier ones, like.
Oh, probably. Well, it is, yeah.
Like Chamber of Horror.
Find it.
It's one of those things that needs itching now. He's got to find it.
I'm getting old, you see. I can't remember anything. Legacy is quite. Motherland. That's the one.
Yeah.
That is quite Rushish. Evaporation is a love letter to Kate Bush.
That's even what is it? Oh my gosh, the song before Richelieu's Prayer. I forgot what that is.
Don't Lose Control.
Don't Lose Control. That is like, even that has a bit of a Kate Bush kind of vibe to it. I don't know. For me, at least the way you.
I never thought of that.
Yeah, I don't know, but yeah, no, that's really cool. And I read that in the book, and it's like, I can totally see it. It's like totally Kate Bush inspired. By
yeah, the actual. There's a song she did called Reaching Out, and the chorus of Evaporation is very like Reaching Out, to be perfectly honest.
Is that off of what is it? The Central
It's on
World?
Sensual World, yeah.
Okay, yeah.
So
Okay.
if you, I'm singing Evaporation, I'm singing that, and she goes, reaching out for the stars, and it's a very similar kind of thing. And I was hoping that no one had noticed, but of course everyone will now.
Yeah. Yes. Oh my gosh.
But,
No, but yeah.
I hadn't played live for a long time either, not for years. But no, I like it. I mean, Chamber of Horrors, for example, I think it's a great song, but it is kind of quite generic rhythmically. Room 801, actually, we've had in the set, fairly recently, and I've always liked that particular track. Akaba's got a slight Eastern sort of feel to it. In fact, that was one of the first times that we tried doing that kind of thing. And Mark Andrews, who was our keyboard player at the time, I mean, he was only a teenager when we were doing all this stuff. And he lives up the road. In fact, you've moved within 5 miles of him, haven't you? Literally in the last
yeah.
week.
Oh, no,
there are 2 keyboard players who live quite close.
yeah.
It's quite funny.
Yeah, hopefully we're all going to catch up soon. A little bit of luck, be good.
No, definitely.
Yeah.
And but no, I mean, I'm proud of that first album. It's not the best produced. I mean, of course, in those days, the gear wasn't as good anyway, and it was recorded on obviously tape, as everything was in those days. And we didn't have a lot of money, but I'm proud of the fact that 3 out of the 5 band were still teenagers. It was self-produced pretty much. We worked with an engineer, a guy called Steve Smith, who's a really nice guy, but he didn't really understand where we were sort of coming from. But we did a pretty good job, and we did well with it as well. It got us in the door, got our foot in the door. That was the main thing. And I mean, I still think some of those songs are really strong, and I think if we recorded some of those songs with the technology we've got now and with the nuances that Dean would provide, which would be slightly different, I think some of them would be cracking, actually.
Yeah. We had with Karma for One, didn't we, on the Following Ghosts album, where we didn't have the right person behind the desk for us to be able to get out of Spencer what we needed, and we ended up sort of playing it ended up being the tail wagging the dog. So Spencer ended up playing the drums, and then I had to play all the sequence stuff live over the top of Spencer's drumming, because and it was only when we worked with Carl that we realized that he needs the particular sound of metronome. The click needs to be a particular tone, and I think he was just given a rim shot, wasn't he, at the studio, and it just didn't work. And it's little things like that which over the years we sort of started discovering to get to where we did by the time we worked with Carl. Fantastic.
Yeah. And of course, Following Ghosts was the last album we recorded on tape, wasn't it?
Yeah.
We used a studio 2-inch machine for that. So
but then when we used Pro Tools the very first time for Year Zero, it was the producer for that one for us, who the engineer producer, he was using it like a tape machine. So we were using Pro Tools, but really it was a glorified digital tape machine with just stems of audio running across. No real using the benefits of Pro Tools. There was no sort of like, locking it in time and being able to copy, paste, edit, crossfade, etc. There was none of that involved in it, was there? It was all just a nice clean sort of, it was by the time we got to work with Carl that we started to realize, and he did tell us, if you want to compete, the people you're going to compete with, you need to be doing the same as what they're doing. So I think we had that little bit of time, didn't we, when it was like, okay, we need to play the click tracks, we need to really start to lock in what we're doing here. And that was just enlightening for the band, and I think that was the thing that really carried us forward. And again, as I said earlier on, that's going back to working with Carl.
No, totally. And of course it's sort of industry standard, and Year Zero was an odd album because we started recording on ADATs, didn't we, initially? And then we had to transfer those ADAT tapes to Pro Tools and then carry on working with it. And it's a shame because this one album, I must admit, I'd love to revisit, but of course we haven't got the masters because our
No.
engineer sort of disappeared. So
Yeah.
we never know quite what happened to the masters.
No,
But,
never got them. No.
no, but that's
All
the
we've
only.
got of that is literally the stereo. We've literally got the CD, haven't we?
Yeah, yeah.
That's all
Which
we've
is a
got of
shame.
that one. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But yeah, but again, that was an interesting album because that was sort of all over the place, you know, musically, you know, lots of different things.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely one of my favorites from you guys. You know, I think and that was kind of a, you know, interesting period in the sense that obviously like it's called year zero. You're kind of starting, you're given carte blanche in a way, like you're starting from scratch, and you're in the sense that like it's obviously you're, instead of going using tape, you're using kind of more advanced technology, and also it's it feels like you've really honed in your sound, and you're really like, this is the start of Galahad. I mean, I would say maybe even Following Ghosts or even Sleepers to an extent is like where that's kind of was starting, but you just, there's a confidence in yourself as a band, I feel like, more than ever on that album. And I think then again, I know Seas of Change is like, that's like technically one song. I would say this is technically one song, Year Zero, because it just flows so well from section to section. And I think there are some drop dead gorgeous moments on that album. Like there's a part in Democracy which I love. It's absolutely chilling. I forgot which part it is. It's probably like halfway through the song, but you know, it's like, I love that when you take that what is that, Ever the Optimist, that melody.
Yeah.
It's like repeated in Democracy, and it's like even like very dark, and like that part is just chilling to me because it's like very subtle, and I love that. And you know, it's sort of a melting pot of all these different genres and all these different themes and everything like that. And it's
yeah, we had a bit of fun with it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I think when I joined the band, we worked on Following Ghosts, and it was very much, we were dipping in on each song. Some songs I wrote solely with Stuart and Roy. Other songs the band had already had. I mean, my OP was basically finished before I joined the band. Myself and Stu went away and worked on a couple. Stu, you worked on a couple with Roy, and Neil contributed, and we just put all of these ideas into the one pot. When we got to year zero, I felt we really started to apply ourselves as a band to write a piece of music, and it was the first time that I'd been involved in doing all that, and I think all five of us were very much a part of that album, and that was great. That was a real good, and that certainly set us up for then doing Empires, because we started to have a little bit of we had a workflow. I think that gave us a workflow, year zero, and then by the time we got to do Empires, there was a feeling, I don't know how you were with it, Stu, but to me there was a feeling that we were really cohesive, and we were really starting to, we felt like we could do anything at the time. It was starting, and of course year zero started all that off for us. That whole feeling, that whole sort of vibe that we got, and then to carry that through to the next album was great. It was brilliant.
No, it was good.
We needed year zero to be able to come up with Empires. In my opinion, that's what I feel.
I think so. I mean, and also we in those days we worked slightly differently in that we would record the albums and also try them live as well. I mean, we did most of year zero live, didn't we, as well? And and the same with obviously Empires, but that was before we'd even finished recording the album. And I think we were just a little bit more active at times in those days. You know, maybe a few more shows here and there. We probably rehearsed a lot more than we have done of late, obviously because of COVID and Spence, etc. But yeah, I think the band was really gelling, and I think it's no coincidence that Empires is regarded as one of our strongest albums, because we were pretty much on fire in those days. You know, we did some great gigs and sort of got some good reviews and what have you, and I think we were pretty confident. So you know, for a change, you know.
Yeah.
but no, it was good. It's good, you know, it's a good time. And then of course, you know, and then I can't remember for whatever reason we just it kind of, I don't know, I suppose it stalled a little bit, didn't it? Because we didn't release another new album until 2012, did we? So it was quite a while before the
Yeah,
next
it
one.
was, wasn't it? It was, yeah. That was, but that was when we recorded 2 albums together as well, didn't we? We did Battle Scars followed by Euphoria. We actually recorded everything up front and then split the songs into the 2 albums, which seemed or felt appropriate.
Yeah,
That
yeah,
was the first time we did that. So maybe in some ways, yeah, it was seven. I'm sorry, it was 5 years between releases, but at the same time, we came up with 2 albums in the same year
yeah,
at that
yeah.
point.
So
So
again, we tend to kind of stockpile ideas and sort of work on them,
yeah,
and which is what we did with the, you know, the Last Great Adventurer and the Long Goodbye. Most of those songs are songs, you know, as we said, they're quite old songs, some of them. And you know, Another Life Not Lived is, you know, that's what, 12, 13 years old basically.
mm,
But it was interesting. I've recently read a lot of stuff about Queen, and there's stuff that appears on things like A Day at the Races and A Night at the Opera that you think they must have written it for that. And some of those ideas Freddie had before he was even in the band. And it's only when you look back and look at, like you said, you're quite interested in the history of bands and how they work, you know. And it's quite interesting that, you know, he'll then put something into an album, you know, maybe 7 or 8 years after he written the initial, come up with the original idea, you know.
yeah.
And I think even Bohemian Rhapsody, that parts of that song had been written years and years ago. And it was a case of just sort of putting it all together. And I think Fred said it was several songs that were kind of ended up being kind of bolted onto each other, basically. And so, but yeah, it's quite interesting, you know. And I look back at old lyrics sometimes, and I can see lyrics from one song that are in the same song as another song. It's like, blimey, I didn't realise that, and mix and match. But yeah, there's just so many different ways of you know, that apply to the creative sort of process. There's no one way of doing anything, basically, which is great because I think it means that you then get the diversity within the music and the songs as well.
Yeah, and you know, I think Battle Scars and Beyond the Realms of Euphoria, you know, the fact that they were released in the same year, and they're also kind of different albums in my opinion. I think Battle Scars is kind of like, you can kind of take any song off of that album and listen to it on its own, while with Beyond the Realms of Euphoria, that very much flows as kind of like one, maybe not one album, but like there are parts that flow within each other. And I think the the versions that you did of older songs on both of those albums, Sleepers and Richelieu's Prayer, are absolutely incredible. You know, because then again, you always had that heaviness to you. I think you even, Galahad always had that heaviness even with Nothing Is Written, but it's really brought out with Carl Groom's production and like
oh, definitely, that was part of the problem. Nothing Is Written. We had the ideas, but again, it was because it's just the production techniques in those days. It just couldn't bring it out. You know, it's just not. It was never as big and heavy as we wanted it to be. And with Carl, we just found someone who knew how to capture that. And that's one reason why we redid Sleepers and Richelieu's, because we knew we could do a better job. You know. And I'm sure a lot of those other earlier songs would sound amazing now, you know, if we gave it another shot.
That's why we did the redid Richelieu's and Sleepers,
Yeah,
because we
exactly.
knew that with Carl that we could get them the way that I think the band, you know, they were written before I joined the band, but I think you were definitely like, yeah, Carl could make this sound as it should have sounded originally.
Exactly. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
so it's very important.
And it's like you were saying earlier, Dean, about the fact that, you know, as time goes by, your toolbox gets bigger and you've got all these other ways
Yeah,
of working to kind of realize the ideas. And now it's like technology is now caught up with the ideas.
yeah, that's it.
So
And
it ties.
certainly I can think of a few tricks from Carl, which we use and we still use now. A few recording tricks, which you sort of, they're quite obvious when I think of it now, but at the time I was just like, oh my God, what a difference that makes. And of course it helps him when it then comes to the mix and the clarity of the mix, and an awful lot of work with a particular couple of things with me with the keyboards, and also what he would do with guitars to be able to record the guitars in a particular way. which you couldn't replicate live. It was a studio, plenty of studio techniques, and it was massive, the difference, absolutely massive. And then we started thinking, oh yeah, this really is working. This really is working with some of the things that Carl was suggesting that we do. Of course, when we play live, we revert back to playing in the way that we always have. But certainly Carl came up with some brilliant little tips for us.
No, definitely.
Yeah.
He's our George Martin, is old Carl, really.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
our sixth member in a way, in some ways, you know.
There's an awful lot with Carl about control. It's an awful lot about control in what you're doing with your sound and how to control it, I think. And he's a master at that, I think. I think he's brilliant at that.
Definitely.
Yeah. You know, and I think I would totally agree. Carl Groom's production is, you know, adds so much to the overall just the power and the
without a doubt.
Yeah, because you know, you listen to Year Zero and Empires Never Last, and it's very much the same band, but at the same time, it's like you wouldn't think that they're only what 4 years apart from each other, or 5 years, whatever. And yeah, I also found it interesting reading this biography how long it took to record Sleepers, and how you know just the sheer financial devastation of recording that album. And you know,
I think there's a little bit of psychological devastation going on there as well.
Yeah. that kind of, yeah, that leads me to my question.
Time.
Yeah, right. How, like, what made you and the rest of your bandmates want to continue with Galahad as a band? Like, what made you so steadfast in making Galahad continue when you could have easily just like left or quit being in the band? And it, you know,
but the thing is, all throughout doing the album, I mean, it was a nightmare. It took far too long, and when we started the initial idea of it in '91, we managed to finish it in '95. We built up a really good head of steam in the early '90s. We'd managed to get airplay on Radio 1, which is the big national radio station, on the Friday Rock Show. We were playing some gigs in London. We had a couple of albums out. Things were looking good. And then basically we started recording Sleepers, and it just stopped because we kept getting put back. We were told we could come in 1 week, and then, oh no, I'm going to have to get you in a couple of weeks. I've got someone else going on. And also it was getting more and more expensive. And of course, you know, the album cost us over 20k in the end, which in those days was a lot of money anyway. But for a band that was an independent band, that, you know, that was, we had to borrow money from people, you know, some of our parents and what have you. But I'm proud of the fact. But the trouble is, I'm quite I'm not very good at giving up on stuff. So you know, I was determined we were going to get this album finished. Not everybody in the band had the same idea, but I thought, no, if you spent all this money, it's pointless just stopping, because you just thrown it away. So, but we did. We got there in the end, and we released the album, and we paid everything off that we were, you know, that it cost us in the first place. And also, one of the reasons why we recorded the Galahad acoustic quintet was to record something fairly quickly and fairly cheaply, because most of that is quite live, actually. And then we released that, and the idea was to use some of the money from that release to help pay for Sleepers, because we recorded that and released that in '94, which was a full year before Sleepers came out. So that worked really well. And plus, during that time, we were still playing, we were still doing gigs and everything. I mean, we didn't even occur to us that the band would, you know, implode or anything. It just was very hard, because the guy that we were working with, Tony, was quite obstinate and quite difficult to deal with. He promised us quite a lot of things, which we were naive enough to believe. You know, for example, we were told that the guys at EG Records were interested in signing the band, which is one reason why we went with him in the first place. But that never came off. That just didn't come off. And it turned out it was a pipe dream. It wasn't going to happen, because they kind of fell out. And unfortunately, what we didn't realize was also Tony liked to talk a lot. And during recording sessions, he would just tell stories, and we're thinking, hang on, we're paying for this, we're paying for all this studio time, and you're going on and on and on. And even Robert Fripp, who we worked with quite a lot, even he got fed up with it, because he was, you know, similar sort of thing. You know, Tony was supposed to be working for him, but he just spent a lot of time yakking on and not getting on with the job. And it was a difficult situation, but we got there in the end, and we sort of laugh about it now. You know, it's just one of those things that happened, but we survived it and went on to better things, hopefully. So yeah, but like you say, it's all sort of documented in the book.
Yeah.
But I think, you know, we all go through peaks and troughs, and you know, whether it's a relationship or bands or whatever, I think, you know, you all do. So, and unfortunately, that was one of our troughs, quite a deep one. Dragged us back up again. Unfortunately, Carl ended up leaving the country, but hey ho. As a couple of years later.
Oh my gosh, yeah, and some of the anecdotes, I mean, as I said before, I was laughing out loud reading it. Like the one, I think you had a gig in Italy, I believe, and you had to, well, I'm kind of going back and forth, but there was one you were trying to, you were on a tour bus or something like that, and you were driving up this mountain, very steep, and it was well, and also like had like these, you know, didn't really have much. The roads were very narrow, so you know, and there was like a bridge on top, and you
that's it.
get across, and it was like, you know, the reverse back down, and it was like totally
reverse back down the mountain in this coach. That wasn't easy. It was awful. It's quite steep. Well, then go around the other way, around the side of it. It was it was quite it was quite scary at the time. We laugh about it now.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and even the one where I believe, oh my God, I don't know if it was Tim Ashton or some other bass player. I'm terrible with the names, but I think somebody got like engaged, and like him and like Spencer Luckman, I believe it was, they were like drinking very heavily, and then they were like, you know, it was just like a whole thing, and you know, they, you know, were throwing up and everything like that on the bus.
Oh yeah, that was Neil. Neil threw up on the coach.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
River.
Yeah.
Oh dear.
Yeah.
Oh, brilliant.
Yeah.
Well, that was just before I joined, but I heard all those stories. They sort of became a bit legendary, actually.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. God, yeah.
There was one time when we were coming back from a gig in Holland, and Holland's quite notorious for, you know, recreational substances, as they say, and we got basically pulled over at gunpoint in France before we got the ferry, and we had to take all of our kit out of the coach, and they had to basically went through literally everything, and I was getting quite annoyed because we were going to miss our ferry. And I was trying to tell them this, and they wouldn't take any notice. And I was getting quite irate. And Lynn was with us, my wife, and she said, "Stuart, you know, they've got guns. Don't, you know, just calm down."
That is so funny. Oh my gosh. Yeah. No, I read that, and that was.
They didn't find anything, you know, because we didn't have anything, you know. And we did miss the blooming ferry, so we had to get the next one. We got back okay, but yeah. But hey, it's, you know, life experience, isn't it?
Didn't you get something where the coach broke down and then you had to get a taxi for like, I don't know, 100 miles or something, and then they took you to the wrong place?
That's when the coach broke down in Austria, and we basically had to take the coach to a garage in a place called Imst in Austria. Our next gig was in Holland, and we thought, how the hell are we going to get up there? So we ended up actually getting on a train and going on a train ourselves all the way up through Germany, up to Holland, and getting someone to meet us at a station near where the venue was. And the guy, the coach driver, was quite funny. We sent him to Innsbruck to get a minibus to put all the gear in so he could drive up to Holland with the gear in. And he went to Innsbruck, drove all the way back to Imst, which was like a 60, 70 mile trip, so it's probably 140 mile round trip. He turned up at Imst, and we said to him, how come you've still got the seats in it? We said to you, if you get something, make sure there's no seats in it, because if the seats in it, we can't get all the gear in. Oh, sorry, I forgot to do that. So he then made him drive all the way back to Innsbruck and then get another van without seats in and bring it back again so we could get all the gear in. and then he had to drive all the way up to Holland and do the gig. And then when we got to the coast of England, after the gig, we drove up to Calais, and of course we had no a coach, band coach or whatever. He took the van to Calais with all the gear in it. So we had to get a load of trolleys with sort of netting in, like a little trolley train, put all our gear in, and then load that up onto the ferry. He rang the guy who ran the tour, who owned the tour bus, and said, what do I do with the van? He said, I want you to drive back to Austria and stay there until they've repaired the tour bus and then drive it home again. And he wasn't very happy. and when we got back to Dover, we didn't know how we were going to get home. So basically, we seconded, I think it was about 7 or 8 taxis. And so we basically went in convoy in taxis with all the gear back to Dorset, which was like a 150-mile trip or something. And then we told him that we were going to a place called Christchurch, which is where we're kind of from in Dorset. He misheard us and thought we'd said Chichester. So we were all very tired and we were all asleep. And then we turned up in this car park and this taxi driver said, oh, we're here.
Halfway. Yeah.
I don't recognize this town. I've no idea where we are. This isn't Christchurch. He said, oh, Christchurch. I thought you said Chichester. No, I don't even know Chichester. So we had to get back in the car and then drive another 40 or 50 miles back to Christchurch.
We couldn't do that nowadays. We couldn't cope with that anymore now. But back in those days, I suppose.
We just got on with it. We just did it.
Yeah.
You know? Couldn't now. It'd be too stressful.
Well, we've stayed at places where we've just been like, just kip out on the floor or on a couch or whatever. But yeah, nowadays we want our comforts a bit more, don't we? But
yeah, on a bit now. So yeah. We paid our dues in that respect, I think. So, yeah. But it's all good fun, you know.
Yeah.
Nice to have them.
Yeah. I can't express how thankful I am for your time, both of your time. I think this has kind of been something that I've been wanting to do for a while, because I'm a huge Galahad fan, even though I haven't been a long-term Galahad fan. I'm a huge Galahad fan. I've been a fan since the moment I've first heard anything.
It's nice to hear. It's nice to hear without at the risk of sounding patronizing. It's nice to hear someone like yourself, someone a bit younger, who has listened to our music and is getting into it. And it proves that, we can appeal not just to our own sort of demographic. Do you know what I mean? When we formed the band, we were all in our late teens, early 20s, and most of our audience were as well. But of course, they've grown with us over the years and grown older with us over the years. And but we have, we've also carried or built up or found a younger audience as well. And I think I think half the battle is getting out there, isn't it? It's actually getting exposure and getting people to listen to it. And people, I think, are a lot more broad-minded than the media would have us believe. The radio or magazines or whatever. People are very good at making up their own minds.
Yeah, absolutely. And then again, I have all my friends are involved in the music department at my school in some way, and we talk about music a lot. And I always mention prog bands like you guys, or maybe more I wouldn't say traditional, but like 70s prog bands, so like Genesis or whatever. And it's the most incredible feeling to like be able to just have a conversation about like your favorite bands and stuff like that. And I mention Galahad quite a bit to all my friends. And they hopefully after, because I know a lot of them will probably watch this interview or this conversation, and maybe give you guys a listen, because I think you've undoubtedly, your music has changed my life, and I am so
interesting. Positive, I don't mind.
Yeah, that's good enough. It's also interesting that some of the things you said, I can hear that you get it.
Mhm.
as well. You get us, you get where we're coming from, and sometimes that doesn't always happen. So that's really cool.
Yeah,
Certainly the wavelength, you're there with that.
It's all about empathy. It's all about empathy.
Yeah.
People understanding what you're trying to get at, and it's amazing. Some people do, and some people don't. I guess we're all different. But something can affect you massively and give you goosebumps. And yet other people just listen to it and go, "What?" You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
especially if you're enthusiastic and you show someone and they go, "Yeah, it's all right." It's like, "Oh, God."
Yeah. No, I definitely wanted to do my research for this because I think then again, it was hard for me to find information about you guys other than through your website. But I just reading this biography, it made me fall in love with the band even more. Because it's just like you hear the blood, sweat, and tears put into like all the music that you put out, and it's just like it makes you appreciate it even more. On top of the fact that it's just great music in and of itself. So yeah, and I'm looking forward to the new album, and I hopefully it's I know obviously you guys have been around for a while, but I think you have quite a few albums left
I
in
hope so.
your discography. Yeah,
Fingers crossed.
yeah. But I will.
Yeah, we've got quite a few ideas and what have you. We always have quite a lot of ideas just sitting there in the background, and then they'll sort of morph into something. But I think me and Dean have discussed this. It will be interesting to see what happens when we start writing with Lee and Mark, because we've never really written with Lee and Mark before. Because of course they joined the album, joined the band after those albums were kind of finished in a way, or written certainly. And the reason why me and Dean have done most of the writing of this is simply because we're the ones who've got the motivation, and we want to do it, and that hasn't always been the case with various other sort of band members and what have you. It's not because we're some kind of sort of control freaks or something, but we'd actually quite like someone else to get involved.
Dictatorship.
But at the same time, I think we're proud of what we've achieved, and I must admit, when I was, maybe your age, I wouldn't have even thought about the fact I might be doing this stuff, getting on for 40 odd years later, and I must admit, I quite enjoyed being a lot younger, because it was fantastic discovering all these bands from the 70s and what have you for the first time. The first time I found Selling England by the Pound, I was actually drunk. I was playing pool, and I was drunk, and I think I was actually under the pool table, and I heard this. Can you tell me where my country lies? And I thought, who's that? That's really unusual. And it was and then they played the whole album, and I must have been about 14 or 15, I suppose, at the time. And I just thought, wow, this is amazing. It's so different from what's in the charts. You know what I mean? It's so unusual. And the same thing when I first heard Rush, for example, or Yes, or Pink Floyd, or whatever, or even Barclay James Harvest, and or Jethro Tull. So many bands, and the trouble is now we've got everything. So there's new stuff coming along, but I find it a little bit more difficult to find newer stuff that I really, really like or can get into. I don't know why that is. But I think we're also quite focused on doing our own thing. So sometimes I don't listen to too much other stuff, because it's nice to. Otherwise, you do get a bit influenced by things if you listen to stuff too much. If I listen to a Rush album now, I'll write a song and send it to Dean and think, oh shit, it sounds a bit too much like something off Power Windows or something.
I have to stop myself from listening to prog. I try not to listen to prog at all, otherwise I'm going to be. And I did when we did Seas of Change a bit more, and you start to get influenced if you're not careful. So it's nice to have an identity of your own, really.
Yeah, and I think that's the one thing that we have got. I mean, hopefully you can see that as a third party. I think we've kind of got our own sound these days, and I mean, I think the way Dean writes the keyboard parts are quite different to a lot of bands, certainly a lot of prog bands anyway. And of course, you unfortunately got my voice to put up with as well, which is all that's on every album, as it were. and I think Spencer's got his own drumming style as well, you know. So but yeah, you know, hopefully we can keep moving forward, and hopefully people will enjoy what we're coming up with.
Absolutely, yeah, because I you know, I'm somebody who likes to, you know, obviously I like music for my own enjoyment, but I get a lot of enjoyment out of sharing it to other people and letting them experience this. And it's, you know, unfortunately I'm cursed with um love, I love prog, you know, and that's not something that you can connect a lot with people, especially for my generation, you know. So you know, it's kind of like a curse in a way, but you know, I love prog, and I'm not ashamed of my love for it. It's you know, it's what made me fall in love with music, and that's kind of like my whole identity as a, you know, all my friends are like music, and I'm involved heavily in the music. I perform quite a bit, and
Cool,
you know,
good, yeah.
yeah, I think I'm you know, I'm eventually gonna go off to university or college or whatever, and study music, and you know, hopefully make it like a living, right? Releasing music and whatever. But no, I am forever a Galahad fan. I will be a Galahad fan for the rest of my life. You know, because it's just like, it's just that
Long on.
yeah, really. No, yeah, no, but I'm very I'm a stalwart or a loyal fan. You know, yeah, I just want to thank you guys so much for your time. I really enjoyed having this conversation. You know, it would have been, if I talked to you, it would have been the same if I talked to, like, you know, Peter Gabriel or something like that. It's like I have the same passion for.
Cheers. Yeah,
Yeah,
thank you.
absolutely. And so yeah, thank you so much. And I'm excited for the new album, and hopefully this isn't the last time we get to talk to each other, you know.
Yeah, well, like I said, we've got the new album we're hoping to get out maybe towards the end of the year, probably September, October time. And then yeah, maybe, you know, we'll talk again.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Well, thank you guys so much. And I'll
Been a pleasure.
yes.
Yeah, that's good fun.
Yes.
Yeah, it's good. And where did you say you were again? Was it Wisconsin?
Oh yeah, it was Green Bay, Wisconsin. So like,
Sorry?
Green Bay, Wisconsin. Yes.
Green
Bay Packers. Yeah.
Yeah, like the Packers.
Oh,
Yeah.
very good. Oh yeah,
Yeah, we're known for cheese
yeah.
and beer and everything like that, and
Yeah.
all that stuff. So you know, that's kind of part of our culture in a way. So yeah, yeah. Even though I don't, you know, yeah. But yeah, and I would love to, you know, I've never been outside the country, but I would love to visit, you know, England and just the UK as a whole. You know, I think.
Yeah, you never know. I mean, you know, we might even go back to the States one day. Who knows?
Yeah.
But,
Is Rosfest still happening? I don't know. Or
I'm not sure actually. I know that obviously they moved venue, didn't they? Is it in Florida now or something?
oh, okay.
And George isn't involved, I don't think, because he's not very well, George Roldan, which is a shame. But as to whether it's happening this year, I have no idea. Or maybe it's, I don't know. But yeah, but it would be lovely to go back again sometime. We loved it so much when we came last time. And the American fans were incredible, really, really very upfront, you know, very vociferous, more so than in the UK, to be honest. But and it would be nice one day to come back. It's just logistics and money, basically. That's what it is.
Yeah, that'd be lovely.
Yeah, there's a lot of like tax.
Oh yeah, it's crazy. It's got worse, unfortunately.
Oh my gosh.
But when we went to Rosfest, it actually wasn't too bad. It wasn't too difficult. It was quite a straightforward thing, but it's not so much now because of visas and goodness knows what, and just the pure cost of it all has gone up so much. But it would be good, at, you know, maybe at some point to come over.
Yeah,
and we'll let you know. And we have found with this album actually that there's been quite a lot of interest in various pockets of the States and what have you. Probably more so than on most of the other albums. So it's a good sign.
Yeah.
So we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Well, thank you guys so much. I will leave you go now, but as I said, hopefully it's not the last time we talk. And you know, it's been an incredible time talking with you guys. So yeah.
Yeah, you too. No, it's been good fun. Yeah.
Yes,
Okay. Take care.
yes, thank you.
See you
Cheers.
later.